I'm Nick Altmeyer with linkinglewiscounty.com. We're here today with Lewis County Manager Ryan Piche, and we're here to preview the 2020 tentative budget that's going to be presented to the legislators at the November 6th meeting. So, first off, let's just get through a little bit of the process of what the process is with the budget thing.
Sure.
So, you guys had a workshop in October.
We did. Yep, so we had a workshop on October 15th where we presented some of our preliminary ideas to the Board of Legislators. They were able to provide some feedback on those ideas. We've brought a couple things to the Finance and Rules Committee. Really, we start the budget planning process in July and for November approval. So we've really been working at this in-house for quite a while. The Finance and Rules Committee, gets to weigh in on some of the things we're trying to do with personnel, and we've shifted some money around, to different funds, and so the Finance and Rules Committee has provided some guidance. Then we'd have the workshop on the 15th. The tentative budget is the first kind of printed budget document that is available, and that will be available for legislators and the public on Tuesday the 6th. From there, the tentative budget gets approved by the legislators. They can make any changes that they want. We do have a public hearing on November 19th, and so anyone from the public, any organization or individual that feels that they want to weigh in on the spending plan for 2020 is more than welcome to join us on November 19th for some additional discussion on the budget. And then from there, it can be approved either on the 19th, or if there's significant changes or other things the legislators want to look at, they can approve it into December in one of our December meetings. So,
okay.
But once it's presented, it's in the hands of the legislators, and any changes from this point forward will have to be done by resolution by the legislators.
Okay. So they'll have a chance between the 5th and the 19th to really go over everything with a fine-tooth comb if they choose.
Yes, absolutely.
And any amendments that they want to make, they can present at the budget meeting on the 19th.
They can. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So what people are anxious to hear, I guess, is this year we have pretty much a neutral budget compared to last year. So as far as the tax levy rate is concerned.
Yeah, last year we went up a little less than 2%. I think it was 1.93%. We took the budget up last year, and that was strictly for to bank some money for capital planning, knowing that we have some physical plant needs that we need to address with our office facilities and our highway garage. So that was the goal last year. That same extra $300,000 that we raised last year, obviously with a neutral budget, will be raised again this year, and we'll continue to put that $300,000 away for capital planning. But we're not going up any additional this year. So the same tax bill that you got last year, will be very similar this year. Of course, the exception is if your property gain value, then your property value has increased, but the rate at which we are taxing the property has not increased. It'll stay at $7.49 per $1,000 of value. So if someone has a $100,000 property, their county tax bill will be $749.
Okay, exactly the same as last year.
Correct.
Yep. So there's a 0% increase in the levy.
Rate. In the rate, not the levy.
In the rate.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Because that leads to our next point with spending is actually up a little bit over last year, about 5%. So we're going from $47.6 million up to $50 million. And so can you explain how spending goes up, but the tax rate stays the same?
Yeah, so a variety of factors go into what we consider the levy. So Nick's right, the overall budget expenditures will go up to $50 million this year. That's about a 5% increase, but we're also planning on about a 6% increase in revenue. So that's sales tax, mortgage tax, anything from DMV fees. All of those revenues have been doing quite well and have been strong receipts over the last couple of years. So we feel comfortable moving those up. The other thing that helps offset an increase in spending is, like we talked about before, if somebody builds a garage on their property, or somebody builds a new property, a new home. The value of that property increases, and when the property value increases, we don't have to necessarily raise the rate to raise more funds.
Right.
And so, the economy is good, which means our sales tax has been very strong, and a lot of people have been developing property in Lewis County, which means that we are able to spend a little bit more without having to increase the property tax rate. That doesn't mean that we're spending, out of control.
Right.
It's hard enough to keep spending under the tax cap and keep it at zero, as it is. So, there's certainly nothing in here that is frivolous by any means.
Okay. So, like you alluded to, a large factor in that is that the overall taxable value in
Yes.
the county has increased quite a bit over last year.
Yeah, actually, taxable value, meaning the total value of everybody's property in the county, last year was about $2.2 billion. This year it's $2.27 billion. So about a 3.7% increase in taxable value.
Right.
So, like we said before, when the value of the property increases, we can collect more revenue without changing the rate.
Okay.
So that is, how we're able to balance the budget.
Okay. So, as we talk about spending going up a little bit, part of the reason before we get into some of the local stuff is that I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the state mandates that really drive a large portion of the budget.
Yep. So when you get your property tax bill, what you need to keep in mind is that 79% of your bill that you are going to be paying is going towards programs that are mandated by the state of New York or the federal government. So they're not for locally funded programs that the legislators or our staff comes up with. They are programs that come from Albany that we have to execute in Lewis County. Now, I'm not making any comment on the quality of those programs, things like pre-kindergarten, Medicaid, other public health programs that we do, foster care, certainly caring for the county's, orphans and the population that can't care for themselves are good things, but they're things that we don't have flexibility on.
Right.
The state's telling us how we need to execute that money and how we need to, to spend for those programs. So, like I said, when you get your tax bill from the county, your property tax bill, 79% of that bill that you pay is actually going for programs that were not developed here, but are developed in Albany, that we are forced to execute.
Okay. So on a local level, what are some of the things that have led to a spending increase this year over last year? So I know we have a couple of personnel additions.
Yep, so a couple personnel additions. The first thing, though, I want to talk about is additional reforms that have come out of Albany this year. So criminal justice reform is something that you guys probably have read about. There's three aspects to criminal justice reform that Albany has dealt with this year. The first is discovery reform, and in discovery reform, it changes the structure for prosecuting crimes and the timeline for what is considered a speedy trial. So from the date of arrest, we now have 15 calendar days to build the case, every witness, every document we're going to need to bring that case to trial. That is a large change for our relatively small DA's office and sheriff's office to be able to collect all the investigative data they need and all the witnesses that they're going to need for a case. So that is an arena that is going to cost us a little bit more money. We have to be prepared for that. We have to be able to safely prosecute criminals in the community. So we are adding an additional assistant district attorney. So traditionally, Lewis County has had two district attorneys, your district attorney and then an assistant district attorney. We're adding a third district attorney that will be able to assist in the prosecution of crimes. So that's something that is going to affect our budget. I mean, positions are expensive.
Which we currently had a second part-time district attorney, so we're just increasing that position to a full-time?
Yep, from part-time to full-time, so the total cost increase to the budget this year is about $70,000 to make that change from part-time to full-time.
And we'll have
that
two
includes
full-times.
benefits and retirement and all that, yes. So you'll have the elected district attorney and then two assistants that can help her. The other reform for criminal justice is cashless bail. So we think that this might actually reduce costs to a certain extent because we're not going to be able to hold criminals the way we have traditionally. So if you're a nonviolent offender, you're not going to be able to be held in county jail. So potentially we're thinking maybe a decrease about maybe 10% in the county's jail census. That doesn't save us a lot of money because our staffing
Mandatory minimums and
we
things
have
like that.
we have mandatory minimum staffing from the state anyway.
Mhm.
So 10%, really until you change, about 50% of the population, can you really get any savings from staffing? But the marginal things like inmate medical, inmate food, we could see reductions in those, but we kind of held them steady, not knowing how this was going to play out. The most important thing for cashless bail, though, is that it might require us to execute an electronic monitoring program.
Mhm.
So currently we don't do ankle bracelets.
Mhm.
Probation department doesn't do any of that.
Right.
But if
The judge
someone
might require it.
cannot be held, and we need to keep track of that person, then the judge might require that program. So we did add some money into the budget this year to account for a potential electronic monitoring program that Lewis County has never had in the past.
Mhm.
And then indigent defense is the third aspect of criminal justice reform. So the Public Defender's Office, which in our case is Lewis Defenders in Lewis County, they will be getting about $2.5 million over the next 5 years. That will allow them to beef up their, the amount of attorneys that they have, the amount of expert witnesses that they can bring to a trial, the amount of appeals that they can file.
Mhm.
So if the defense, is getting serious injection of resources, then it's up to
It affects the prosecution too.
It's up to the taxpayers of the county then
Mhm.
to make sure that the prosecution isn't outgunned. And so that's another reason why we wanted to add that additional attorney this year. And we've also added some money into the DA's professional services line item because they might want to bring more witnesses and if there's more appeals, they need to have
Right.
more money to fight appeals. So the whole process is likely to get more expensive. If you give one side money, the other side's going to need some. So that's kind of, the criminal justice reform. And, those things individually don't make a huge difference, but you start adding all the state programs together and it's,
Right.
I like to call it death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
It's a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, but they all add up to, a pretty large
And on top of
budget.
the raise the age
Yeah.
part of criminal justice reform that has taken place over the last couple of years, so you add it
Yeah.
all together. And
Yeah, it's been, the way we approach criminal justice in the last 3-4 years at the county level has really been turned upside down. The state has made a lot of reforms,
Mhm.
in that front and left it up to counties to, to adjust.
Okay. So outside of the district, increasing the district assistant district attorney from part-time to full-time, we have 2 other personnel adjustments this year. So did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So just to point out, first of all, that over the last 10 years, county employment has actually dropped almost 20%, 19% over the last 10 years. We had 369 full-time equivalent employees 10 years ago. Today we have 298.
Mhm.
So we are trending in the right direction. We are getting more efficient. We're making the right investments in technology
Mhm.
and increasing productivity for our employees, which is a good thing. But there comes a time when you do need to, pick some strategic areas to invest in. One of those is information technology.
Mhm.
One of the reasons we've been able to reduce employment is because we've added a ton of computer systems, software, paperless. We have almost every department in the county is now going paperless.
Mhm.
And so as we've added these software systems, we have not added anyone to our IT department. So next year we want to add an additional individual, a computer assistant that can, help us keep track of all of these software programs that we've, invested in over the last, few years. The other position that we're adding is we're upgrading a part-time crew leader that works in the Recreation, Forestry, and Parks Department,
Mhm.
and we're bumping that up to a full-time position. And so this comes back to really being serious about economic development and quality of life in Lewis County.
Mhm.
We have lots of surveys that we receive, and we hear from residents that outdoor recreation is one of the big reasons why people come here. It's why people visit here, and for the residents that live here, it's one of the things that's most important to them. So adding another position that can maintain our trails, build new trails, and work on the recreation, parks, and forestry aspects of the county's resources. is going to be an investment that we feel will pay off in the long run by making it a place where more people want to come and spend money, and more people want to come and live. So
And that includes managing the forest and
it
things
does.
like that?
Yep. The county has over 6,000 acres of forest land that we manage. So we log that, and managing those logging contracts and making sure that we're being responsible stewards of that land and not overlogging. That takes manpower to do that, and traditionally we've only had one person full time in this department. So bringing a second full-time position online, I think will be helpful for that department. And like I said, these are investments, IT and recreation. They're investments that are strategic, and hopefully things that will help us be more productive and bring more people to live in the county and widen the tax base.
Okay. Now, obviously, there were additional requests from various departments for personnel increases, and not all of them were added into the budget this year. So these are 3 out of, I think there was 10.
Yeah, we always have departments that feel that they could do more with more personnel, but we have to balance what makes sense for the county as a whole. Right. So like I said, these personnel investments are investments that help everybody and not just a certain department. So that's why these ones were chosen. I would also mention that we have increased part-time funding at the Sheriff's Department.
Well, that was going to be our next topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, go ahead, Seth, if there's anything specific you wanted to ask.
Well, I just wanted to get in a little bit about the Sheriff's Department budget. Obviously, that was a big issue throughout 2019. We had quite a few things come up with that budget. So just kind of curious how things worked out this year with the Sheriff's Office budget, and if any increases were added into the budget.
So, this is a year where we're having a zero tax increase. But again, we are trying our best to try to invest in the Sheriff's Department to give them the resources they need to be successful. So the jail budget is going up 7.9%. And the Sheriff's Road Patrol Dispatch budget is going up over 5%. So in a year where we've kept taxes down, we're allowing growth in those departments. And so we're trying to do our best by the sheriff and for public safety. One of the things that I think is really going to help alleviate some of the issues that we had this summer was that we have fully funded all of the part-time positions. So in the past, we have 4 part-time dispatchers, 4 part-time road patrol deputies, and 6 part-time corrections officers. The reality is not all of them are going to work a full 20-hour week, and we've always budgeted that way, assuming that they wouldn't. But really, we want them to, because we want the part-timers to be working, because you're getting double your bang for your buck than a full-timer who's getting paid overtime. Right? Because the overtime person is getting 2 for 1. Right. So what we're doing this year is we're fully funding. We're going to assume that every part-time person is going to work a full 20-hour week. And then even if, not all of them do, but we want to add another part-time person to work, the more part-time hours we can load up on, the better for the taxpayers. And so, if our trade-off is between part-time or overtime, it makes more sense to spend money on part-timers. So we're trying to really beef up that area of the budget, give them more resources to work with. Now it's going to be the challenge of the Sheriff's Department to find those part-timers that are willing to work, and then keep, I think they really need to continually recruit for some of these, so that, if you do lose someone, we don't have to fill in with overtime, but you have another part-timer ready to go. Right. So that's kind of what our solution that we're going to try to approach the year with this year. Okay. I think the sheriff would probably want me to mention that he did request more than what we gave him, but we just simply can't. You can't keep taxes at 0. You can't have a balanced budget in this environment with the state mandates, and advance a department much more than 8% a year. It's very difficult to do that. So I think we did the best we could, and I hope that I'm confident that we'll be able to settle some of those budget issues in 2020. Okay.
And was the as far as like the line items go, I know you said you're investing a lot in the part-time budget this year. Is the overtime budget remaining the same, decreasing,
We
increasing?
did give a little more for the jail overtime.
Mhm.
Yep, that one we increased, I think, from 25,000 to 50,000. So we're trying to give them more leeway to work with on that side. Road patrol, I don't think we touched the overtime there because we've always given them what they've asked for. They asked for 40,000, we gave them 40,000 last year. So we might have bumped that up, but I don't remember off the top of my head, Nick.
Okay. And then the last thing on the Sheriff's Department budget, obviously over the summer there was some issues with the Parks and Recreation patrols, things like that. So has that been rectified in the 2020 budget?
Well, we have not made any significant changes to the Parks and Recreation Sheriff's budget.
Okay.
In my opinion, that part of the budget was always appropriately funded. The sheriff's argument was, well, other parts of my budget are not appropriately funded, so I'm going to take from Parks and Rec to make up for those other areas. That was probably the biggest fundamental difference between the sheriff and I. But at this point, I think by helping on the other issues that we talked about with the part-timers and helping giving a little more slack on the overtime, it should make it so that there's no need to try to dip into the Parks and Rec side.
Okay.
So that I think we should be okay.
And does the budget include the school resource officers for Harrisville and South Louis? Is that program still going forward as it has the past 2 years?
Yep, two school resource officers, one for Harrisville, one for South Louis. And then the only thing that we changed this year is that their wages and fringes for the non-school year months are actually put directly in the Parks and Rec line item.
Okay.
So, that's where their resources are expected to be, and that's where the Board of Legislators expects them to be working when they're not in the schools, which was what I think the intent of what the legislators wanted when we created those positions to begin with.
Okay. And then the schools will still be paying for a portion of
Absolutely.
as they have in the past?
Yep. The schools pay for the portion, of when those officers are working in their districts,
Right.
and we pay for when they're off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so moving on from the sheriff's budget, was there any other departments that seen a significant increase or decrease in expenses this year for
Yes.
2020?
Yes. The highway department. So we have held the highway department's levy amount, so what they request from the taxpayers, we've held that steady for many, many years. But we also went through these cycles where we would draw down the highway fund balance and then pour in a big amount from the general fund and then draw it down and then pour in another big amount. That's not really a great way to run a department.
Right.
Really what you want to do is be a little more sustainable. So what we've done this year is we've actually added $160,000 to the levy for the highway department.
Okay.
So of that levy increase that we talked about before, actually a quarter of it is just for the highway department.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is, rather than asking them to balance their budget with fund balance that they draw down slowly over time, what they will do now is be able to balance their budget based on what comes in from the taxpayers, balance that with their savings account, really run it the way you would want any county department to be run. Right. So you're not going to see a significant increase in highway expenditures because we are already expending it. Right. It's just, instead of robbing from Peter to pay Paul, we're going to fund it appropriately in the year, every year. Right. So it's just a kind of a change in the funding mechanism. And since we were able to, balance the budget this year without a tax increase, it was the perfect year to make that change. When things are razor thin and we're looking for every penny, the prospect of adding another $160,000 to the levy is not possible. Right. This year we were able to recognize that we had a little bit of slack, and so it's a perfect year to try to fix that problem. Right. Because really the taxpayers are already paying for it. It's just it goes in the general fund and then goes into the highway fund. So this is a more sustainable approach. Right.
Okay. And then outside of the highway department, obviously you touched on it earlier, but there were you're still setting aside some money for the capital fund. We're still working out what the plans are going to be, if there needs to be a new building, some renovation to existing buildings, things like that. But we're still setting aside funding for that as well in the 2020 budget.
Correct. So we raised the tax a little bit last year in order to set some money aside for capital funding. That same margin will be set aside this year. In addition, we have the Denmark Wind Project coming on board. That money will exclusively be set aside for capital. It's not used to balance our day-to-day operations. We only use windmill money, and have since 2005, for capital expenditures. And then we have upped our internal amount that we're trying to shuffle towards capital. So next year, $888,000 will be set aside for capital. So we're getting pretty close to a bond payment on something big.
Right.
About $900,000 will get you a good bond payment on a serious project.
Right.
So we are where we need to be. The question now remains, what investment are we going to make? What size investment? Where? Which departments need to be addressed in which order? And that's really where the legislators come in. That's their role to lead the county on these big picture items. And so we are set up financially. I would say the ball's on the tee. It's all about how we're going to swing and where we want to put our investment. So.
Right. Okay. So, kind of wrapping up the budget talk a little bit. I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about the county still does have a healthy fund balance.
Yes. Yep.
And I think we're using 1.65 million from the fund balance for the 2020 budget to.
Yep. So our fund balance is at $8.8 million for the general fund. That is 18% of our total operation. So well within what any auditor or financial guru would say is a conservative, safe amount for your savings account. More importantly, though, is that the hospital has built up a reserve that is at 30% of their operating costs. So in the past, the county had a tendency to beef up our general fund balance in case the hospital had an issue. We don't have to do that anymore. The hospital not only has a savings account, but they put a lock and key on it that says they have to maintain that amount. Which will take the burden off the taxpayers and off us, from having to build up a huge amount in our general fund. So our general fund is at $8.8 million. It actually went up 10% from last year. Last year we were at $8 million. So we have increased our general fund. We're continuing to kind of put some money away and save. We are going to use $1.6 million of that savings to balance the budget this year. But traditionally, it hasn't, we don't usually use all of that money. And we usually budget so conservatively that we know we're not going to spend as much as we put in, and we know we're going to receive more than what we expected. So my anticipation is that we're not actually reducing the fund balance $1.6 million. My like last year, we went up 10%, but we still used $1.6 million last year. So at the end of the day, it'll balance out. But I like to think of fund balance as a ballast in a ship. We can go, we can change the rate crazy. 1 year go up 10%, the next year down 20%. I don't think that's healthy for the taxpayers. That's not healthy for a budget. So if you can use your fund balance to kind of smooth out those edges and kind of ride out and just play the larger trend, I think that's the smarter play. And so that's what we've been doing over the last couple of years is just try to use that fund balance to get us through the choppy waters, but also not degrade in any way our total amount in our savings account.
Perfect. Was there anything else that you feel stood out in the 2020 budget that people would like to know about?
You gotta put me on the spot, Nick. I don't know. I don't think so. I think we
covered quite a bit of it.
Covered it. Yeah. You know what it is? I would just say this. It's worth mentioning that the cost of Medicaid in New York State is expensive, and when you get your tax bill, like we talked about before, 79% of that is going to be state mandated programs. Okay, but perhaps more interesting is that almost 18%, 17.6% of your tax bill that you're going to receive in the mail from us is just towards Medicaid. And so New York and Illinois are the only two states that make local county taxpayers pay for Medicaid. And so, imagine taxes going down 18%.
Right.
They could if the state of New York acted the way every other state in the union does.
Right.
So, some of these things are just simply not in our control.
Right.
And, we do the best we can to present a budget that's fair, knowing full well that 17% before we even get started
Right.
is going to go towards a program that we have no control over. So I think that's always worth mentioning
Right.
when people open their tax bills. But beyond that, I'm proud of the work that we did. I will say this, Patty O'Brien, this is her last budget. Patty has been with the county for 30 years, just a steadfast, competent public servant. Humble but incredibly skilled at what she's done, and there's no way I could have stepped in here and done the last 3 budgets without her. So
well, now you have all the practice for next year.
Well, thank God, because we'll have somebody new in next year, and I look forward to working with whoever that person is. But Patty is if you see Patty, give her a pat on the back. She has served this community well for many years. These fund balances, the AA credit rating, a lot of that is because of the work that she has done. So my hat's off to her, and congratulations on a great retirement, and thanks for all your help, Patty.
Perfect.
Patty O'Brien, I should say.
Yeah. All right. And so, once again, for people that are interested, the tentative budget is going to be presented to the legislators at the Tuesday, November 5th meeting. And then the budget hearing will actually take place on November 19th. And that is when people can come in and give their feedback on the budget and
Correct.
anything they would like to see added or taken out. And you touched on it before that once the tentative budget is handed to the legislators at the November 5th meeting, any changes at that point would have to take place via resolution.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. All right. So once again, we invite everybody out November 5th, get the preliminary look at the budget, but we pretty much touched over everything this afternoon here in this preview, and we thank you for your time this afternoon, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick.
All right. Yep.